And everybody, 15 minutes ago, the Daily Wire terminated its relationship with Candace Owens. Candace has been an incredibly powerful voice for conservatives for years. Unfortunately, it's become more and more clear, and it's now unavoidably so, that Candace has moved in a direction that the Daily Wire simply cannot and will not support. Candace's shift has done enormous damage to our brand, damage that we've decided we just can't allow to continue. Mostly, but by no means all of this tarnishment to our brand stems from Candace's flirting with, winking at, and even directly engaging in content widely viewed as anti-Semitic, and from associating herself with well-known anti-Semites. The Daily Wire, contrary to public opinion, is not owned by Jews. In fact, the majority of it is owned by Christians, myself included. And we know that anti-Semitism as a charge is, like the charge of racism, often made far too lightly by those who profiteer from such accusations, groups like the ADL or BLM. But that doesn't mean that racism and anti-Semitism don't exist. They obviously do, and they just as obviously have no place in our national discourse. Candace refusing to condemn Kanye West, for example, is not anti-Semitism. I said as much at the time, and I even encouraged Candace not to disinvite Ye from her Greatest Lie Ever Sold premiere after his "I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people" tweet a year and a half ago. I thought at that time that one remark, even a remark as plainly anti-Semitic and asinine as that, wasn't proof that Kanye himself was necessarily an anti-Semite. People say and do all kinds of dumb things all the time, and I didn't think that Candace should necessarily distance herself from her friend at that moment. Did I find it troubling that Candace continued to stand by Ye as the weeks went on and he continued what became maybe the biggest anti-Semitic meltdown in American public life? A meltdown by the end of which he had praised Hitler, announced a run for the presidency, and hired the most prominent apologist for anti-Semitism in the country, Nick Fuentes? Yes, I did. And I argued pretty passionately with Candace about that point at the time. But I still didn't think that her behavior rose to the point of parting ways. Fast forward a little more than a year later, however, and there's a lot more cause for concern. Here are just a few examples from just the last few weeks. Candace appeared on the Fresh and Fit podcast, which itself spews anti-Semitism and talks about the JQ, which means the Jewish question, routinely. And Candace said nothing while the host played a cha-ching cash register sound at the mention of any Jew or Israel, including Ben Shapiro's wife. We have a clip here of that for you.
He is very passionate about Israel. He's married to an Israeli. I mean, that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
Imagine Ben Shapiro sitting on a podcast that was known for spewing hate toward Black people, and then sitting idly by while the host made jokes, racist jokes about Candace's family. You can't imagine it because it's unimaginable. It would just never happen. Only a few weeks before that, Candace lamented, quote, DC Jews, who she says are Marxists and monsters, and who, quote, want nothing more than political power and need to be weeded out. Then just last week, Candace liked a post on X from an account called Christ Gnosis, asking if a well-known rabbi is, quote, drunk on Christian blood again. Now, if you aren't aware, the idea that rabbis and Jews more broadly drink the blood of Christians is one of the oldest expressions of anti-Semitism. It even has its own name. It's called the blood libel, and it's been used to pit Christians against Jews since the Middle Ages. The blood libel has been used all throughout history to incite the hatred and murder of Jews. I don't claim to know what's in Candace's heart. What I know, as I've said, is that she has been flirting with, winking at, and even directly engaging in content that's widely viewed to be anti-Semitic, and even worse, known and unabashed anti-Semites seem to have taken a real liking to her. They routinely celebrate her, invite her on their podcasts, like her X posts, and retweet them, and she frequently reciprocates. Candace has made something of a sport in these last months out of strongly implying negative things about Jews, only to then deny that she was ever actually talking about the Jews in the first place. Candace made no statement at all in the days after Hamas terrorists raped, murdered, and tortured over 1,000 Israeli civilians, mostly Jews, some Americans. And then they took hundreds more hostage. But then on October 28th of 2023, while anti-Israel protests were raging in London, where Candace, I believe, was at the time, she reposted a video of the protests on X, commenting, quote, interesting thing happening here. People are not accepting the media narrative about what's happening in the Middle East, despite the insistent rhetoric from government officials. On November 3rd, she posted, quote, no government anywhere has a right to commit a genocide ever. There is no justification for a genocide. I can't believe this even needs to be said, or is even considered the least bit controversial to state. There was only one country on earth being accused of genocide at the time. Anti-Semites on X took to it immediately. They cheered at what they rightly or wrongly interpreted as Candace smearing Israel. And Candace didn't rebuff their interpretation. But when Dave Rubin came to the exact same conclusion as the anti-Semites, only instead of cheering for Candace, found it vile and rebuked her, Candace quickly attacked, saying, quote, "What's amazing about this is that I didn't name any country in this tweet. I simply stated that genocide is wrong always. This is not a controversial stance. Interesting how you interpreted it." And then followed up with, quote, "In short, if the blanket statement that genocide is wrong upsets you in any way, then you need to check yourself. I said exactly what I meant, and I won't be backing down or apologizing or further clarifying this statement." Within 24 hours, Candace liked a post calling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal. Now let's be clear. You're free to disagree with Israel's conduct, and you're free to oppose the Netanyahu government. But the idea that Israel is committing genocide or that Netanyahu is a war criminal is just factually baseless. Unfortunately, Candace routinely makes insinuations about Jews that both lovers of anti-Semitism and haters of anti-Semitism both agree is anti-Semitic. And in almost every one of these instances, Candace says nothing to the anti-Semites who cheer her and only pushes back against those who disapprove of her comments. On February 28th of this year, Candace, just asking questions, posted, quote, "Time to look into the history and profiteering of pornography." Her replies were immediately flooded with anti-Semites cheering her for the question and providing the answer that they interpreted her to mean, the Jews. Once again, Candace did nothing to disabuse the anti-Semites of their assumption. But when Anthony Koch came to the exact same conclusion, Candace pushed back, saying, quote, "This is utterly insane. I tweeted that porn is harming men in our society, and this person has interpreted that as an attack on Jews. This is an example of clinical insanity. There is no other explanation." But of course, there are other possible explanations. There are other numerous examples just like this, when the anti-Semites and anti-anti-Semites all agree that what you're saying is anti-Semitic. Perhaps, as a very well-paid professional and expert communicator, you might consider communicating more clearly. Candace hasn't. She's only doubled down. In the last few weeks, she stated or implied that DC Jews control American politics, that Hollywood Jews force certain black artists to create violent and filthy music, that a Jewish gang robbed and killed Michael Jackson, that a Jew killed Lee Harvey Oswald to keep us from finding out that the CIA killed JFK, all this while elevating Osama bin Laden and Muammar Gaddafi and defending Hitler's book burning and apologizing to Muslims on behalf of America for what she calls the brainwashing of Americans after 9/11 and alleged American war crimes overseas. None of which proves that Candace is an anti-Semite. I don't claim to know what Candace actually believes. When I've asked her directly what she believes, she's told me, quote, "I believe what the people believe. I am the voice of the people." Never mind that subordinating your beliefs to the people is both pandering and immoral. It's also vague. Who are the people? And what is it that they believe? Based on her content of late, I can't think that she means Americans broadly or even conservatives broadly. It seems far more likely to me that the people Candace is the voice of are the very people celebrating what she's saying. Here's one of the most prominent anti-Semites in the country giving his perspective on the answer to that question.
I have to stand. I have to stand because she's cooking. She cooked. That's crazy. She tweets a picture of Rabbi Shmuley. Bill, she writes. Bill. Nothing else. Incredible. She writes, Phil. She called him an unholy rabbi. I'm stealing that, by the way. If you hear that in my AFPAC 4 speech, I'm giving her credit. I'm stealing that from her. She said, the unholy rabbi. Dude, goated with the sauce, f***ing cook.
Fuentes went on for about an hour celebrating Candace in that episode from 2 weeks ago. Of course, it's not just her associations with anti-Semitism that are damaging to our brand. Over the last few months, Candace has embraced the worst conspiracy theories and the worst people. When she traveled to Romania to interview Andrew Tate, Caleb was clear that we wouldn't pay for her to rehabilitate a pornographer, con man, and an accused rapist. Candace assured him that hers would not be a softball interview. But of course it was. Candace not only allowed Andrew Tate to misrepresent his past statements and the charges against him, she helped him do so. Last week, Candace put out a long tweet trying to frame her position not as supporting the Tate brothers, but simply as being fair-minded about the charges brought against them. That might have been more convincing if she had ever said a single negative thing about them, or if she hadn't liked, responded to, or retweeted them 73 times in the months since the interview. I want to be clear about this. Andrew and Tristan Tate are very bad men who have boasted and even sold courses teaching how to manipulate women through sex into doing pornography for your profit. And again, Candace is a professional communicator. She's very effective at saying what she wants to say, probably as effective at that as anyone alive. And of course, Candace has recently said that she's willing to stake her entire professional reputation on the fact that French President Macron's wife was born a man, despite the claims already having been proven false in French courts. The lady has 3 children. She and her brother, whom the conspiracy theorists suggest is actually her, jointly sued and won against the people who first popularized the conspiracy theory in France. But most troubling to me is Candace's deeply disingenuous use of the term Christ is King. As best I can tell, her first use of this term publicly was in response to Ben. If you recall, Ben was asked at a small private event in a Jewish home how he felt about Candace's behavior post-October 7th. Ben was caught on camera saying that he found her behavior disgraceful and disreputable. That day, Candace posted a verse from the New Testament that man cannot serve both God and money, with a follow-up comment of Christ is King. The remark was widely interpreted as a rebuke of Ben and to mean that Candace could not be bought off by Jewish Ben Shapiro. She and her opinions are in service to God. Ben responded in anger. He said that if Candace believed her contract with the Daily Wire was standing between her and God, she could quit. Candace's response was classic Candace. After saying but not saying exactly what she meant and then being called out on it, she denied that she ever meant it in the first place, and how dare you suggest that she did. She said, quote, "You've been acting unprofessional and emotionally unhinged for weeks now, and we've all had to sit back and allow it, and have all tried to exercise exceeding understanding for your raw emotion. But you cross a certain line when you come for scripture and read yourself into it. I will not tolerate it." She posted again, quote, "You are utterly out of line for suggesting that I cannot quote biblical scripture. The Bible is not about you." Then commented on that post, again, "Christ is King." Here's the thing. I agree that Christ is King. All Christians agree that Christ is King. But why say so here? What's the implication, if not that Candace serves Christ and Ben doesn't? It certainly appears to me that Candace is attacking Ben for the very fact of his Jewishness. In fact, anti-Semites love to bandy about the term Christ is King. Here's our pal Nick Fuentes again.
That's what it's all about. When I come out to these rallies and I see everybody and they bring their rosaries and crucifixes and their American flags, I know we're on the right side of history.
It's probably worth remembering here that Fuentes, when he isn't praising our Lord, has called for a holy war against Jews and said that, quote, "We will make them die in the holy war. They have no future in America. They will go down with their satanic master." Christ is King. Yeah, Christ is King. But the term Christ is King is not a gang affiliation. Christ isn't glorified by your using him as a weapon to cudgel your enemies. And to anyone who would say it's never wrong to say that Christ is King, please tell me what then is meant by the third commandment: "Thou shalt not carry forth the name of the Lord thy God in vain." Surely if one were to rape and murder someone, like Hamas did on October 7th, but all the while shouted to the dying person that Christ is King, we would all agree that 3 horrible crimes were committed. Rape, yes. Murder, yes. But also the crime of implementing God in the first 2 crimes. That's carrying forth the name of the Lord in vain. That's what anti-Semites are doing when they say Christ is King. Christ is King, sure enough. And he recommends himself in our struggles, not us in our petty, nudge, nudge, wink, wink anti-Semitism. All of this has badly tarnished the brand and reputation of the Daily Wire and of me personally as the front-facing CEO. One need only revisit the thousands of virulently and overtly hateful commenters celebrating what they see as Candace's turn against the Jews the remarks from Nick Fuentes, the myriad stories written in journals from Mediaite to the Washington Examiner, to the Jewish Journal, to the Times of Israel, the New York Post, the Daily Mail, and on, or from the many, many people disappointed with the Daily Wire and with me, and even with Ben for not acting sooner, to see how badly marred our reputation has become. And so we're ending our relationship with Candace effective immediately. We're not canceling Candace, as in cancel culture. Candace has every right as an American to damage her own brand. If I were the CEO of a platform like X, I wouldn't kick Candace off of it. But I'm not the CEO of a platform like X. I'm the CEO of the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire is not a platform. The Daily Wire is a publisher. Daily Wire is not a place where people publish their own thoughts. It's a place where we curate the thoughts that we largely align with and voices we believe are doing good in the world. Not just thoughts and voices who happen to agree with Jeremy or happen to agree with Ben all the time. Obviously, I disagree with all of our hosts some of the time. But Candace has now become a voice I simply cannot align with. I believe that she's doing great harm in the world and to the brand that I've worked really hard to build over this last decade, and I'm just no longer willing to subsidize it. And I want to be clear about one more thing. We're not giving in to any pressure from any outside group. Rabbi Shmuley, who Candace has called unholy and accused of blackmailing her, is, as far as I can tell, an abject attention whore. I don't much care what he thinks. I don't much care what kinds of threats that he makes. He's continued to demand that Ben and Dennis Prager fire Candace, but of course, as both Ben and Candace and I have said publicly again and again, Ben doesn't have the authority to fire Candace because he's not a majority owner of the business and he's not an executive in the company. But he's famous and he's Jewish, so Rabbi Shmuley is happy to grandstand by demanding that he do so anyway. As for Dennis Prager, Candace hasn't worked for PragerU in 3 years, and as far as I know, Dennis isn't an executive at PragerU any more than Ben is an executive at the Daily Wire. But again, famous, Jewish, and so Rabbi Shmuley is happy to grandstand. Charlie Kirk, by contrast, who runs TPUSA, where Candace does currently give speeches and make a nice living. Shmuley hasn't said anything about him. Charlie's famous, but he isn't Jewish. That's the kind of guy Rabbi Shmuley is, and the reason that we would never give in to any kind of pressure from a man like him. This decision has nothing to do with Shmuley or any other Jewish pressure coming to bear. This is about the very Christian CEOs of the Daily Wire finally seeing what we were both loath to see before, what I was loath to see before, that Candace is not on our team. She's not pursuing the future that we're pursuing. She's not appealing to the audience we're appealing to. She does not hold the values that we hold to. I gave her every benefit of the doubt. I gave her far more benefit of the doubt than I should have, and I'm done. Candace has violated the terms of her contract in myriad ways. She has a contractual obligation not to tarnish our brand, but she has. She has a contractual obligation not to do anything that a reasonable person might construe as anti-Semitic or to align her brand with anti-Semites, but she has. And by the way, it was her attorney who suggested that we put that clause in her contract in the first place after the Kanye mess. It wasn't our idea. For all of those reasons and for many more, we're enforcing our rights under the contract to terminate. Now, I know that this will cause a lot of confusion and harm and pain for a lot of you in this room, especially for those of you who've worked really hard on Candace's content, or for those of you who, like me, have only ever seen her as one of the most talented and important voices in the country. And I'm sorry for that. I hope that we live to see Candace come back from this dark path that she's taken. Again, I see her as one of the most talented people in the country, and when she uses those talents in service of the good and the true and the beautiful, I don't believe that there is anyone better, maybe in all of the world, than she. That's not what she's doing today. I hope that she does it again. She won't be doing it at the Daily Wire.